Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming, and those of you who have joined us online. My name's Sonia, I'm a senior clinical psychologist here and the Director of Clinical Programs at Melbourne Centre for Women's Mental Health. I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which our centre operates, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today and also watching us online. We've got a really great lineup this evening and I'm so pleased that you're all here to take part. Special thanks to Phoebe for organising this and for all the speakers who are giving of themselves tonight. Really appreciate it. So we've got a really great lineup and it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Zoe Krupka is a feminist psychotherapist, an academic and writer from Melbourne. Zoe has a bachelor's degree in anthropology and women's studies from Concordia University, a master's and a PhD in counselling and psychotherapy, and is a senior lecturer at the Cairn Mellon Institute. Zoe regularly writes on psychotherapy, behavioural and relational ethics, and joins us this evening to share with us some reflections on the practice of feminist therapy, anti-oppressive practice, and giving up the requirement to be inspiring. Apparently she's going to mention magpies at some point in her talk. I'm not sure how that's going to be related, but I'm looking forward to that part. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zoe Krupka.
Okay, I'll just make sure all this is working. It's very weird to be presenting to lots of people online and a tiny number here, so I'll try not to be so full on. And thank you, Sonia, for doing such thorough research. That's not usually what I experience. I want to start, I guess, by locating myself so you know who I am. I am a white cis pan woman. I'm the daughter of Catholic Czech and WASP Canadians. I grew up on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory on Great Turtle Island. And Anishinaabe translates in English as original person. I've lived in this country for about 30 years now. And I want to thank you for coming to this, what feels like a celebration today, coming into this session from different unceded First Nations lands. And I'm imagining each of you coming here with a desire and a deep commitment to feminist practice. That's what I'm imagining anyway. I think there's a kind of grace, really, when people come together who do the same job. And there's time and space dedicated to sharing with each other about this work that we do in the service of understanding it more fully, celebrating it and working to improve it. Today, I want to share with you some of my thoughts about how we might imagine feminist therapy practice. And to do that, I hope you'll bear with me while I talk about birds, burnout, and letting go of hope. You may have heard that right at this very moment, you might not have heard this actually, probably in Canberra, that magpies are messing with well-meaning scientists and they're removing the data trackers from each other's little feathered bodies. They can't remove their own, but they can take them off of each other. And when I first heard this story, I found myself moved to being hopeful about the prospect of people finally understanding the true intelligence and coolness of birds, and magpies in particular, because they're especially awesome. But I'm really not convinced that things are going to get better for birds living under white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. I'm not sure hope in this situation is more than a delusion. But despite what we've done to birds, actual birds and the habitats that we all depend on, they're still busy helping each other out. they're acting like their lives are their own, whether we're thinking about them or not. They're taking care of their safety and comfort because it's their most important work and purpose. And I want us to keep caring for ourselves and each other in everyday ways, just like that. I think that's what changes our worlds. I want to tell you a little story today. It's not, I believe, an uncommon story, but because it's the story of someone I love, it's a story that touches me deeply. And I think it's a story that brings together what we're thinking about here when we're reflecting on feminist therapy practice and transformation. So one of my young family members recently started working in one of our professions. Newly graduated, fresh and excited, she stepped into work that many of us would be familiar with, the kind of hybrid of counseling, support work, case management. And she had very supportive supervision, which I know you know is rare. And she was held in high regard by her team, her managers, and most importantly, by her clients. And she was in so many respects in the right job. But her work was hard, and there were too many people who needed help and too little to offer them. Her caseload was more than double what mine was 25 years ago in the hardest job I've ever held. And her resources appeared to be less than half of what I remember being able to offer my clients. And very quickly, she began to struggle with feelings of inadequacy and distress. Very quickly, she became depleted and disillusioned. I offered her support, and we had many kind of informal supervision sessions where we spoke about how she might find a way to bear doing what she could, depersonalizing her lack of capacity in an under-resourced system, letting go of the burdens at the end of the day. I'm sure most of you are familiar with doing that kind of work. But eventually she had to leave the job. And in this leaving, again, despite support from her workplace, despite her clients' praise for her support to them and love from her family, she left feeling like she'd failed to do what she'd studied so long for. In short, she took the failings of a broken mental health and community support system into herself. And I think one of the things the global pandemic has taught us is that the supports we have in place in this sector they don't work anymore. They no longer buffer us from this global distress. We're no match for them, really. And in fact, I would argue that this ideal of kind of individual resilience, because isn't that just the buzzword of the moment? If I hear it again, I will be ill. That so many of us were taught in our training that this ideal kind of supports the very systems we all wish were better resourced and more humane. This kind of individualism is anti-feminist because by its very nature, it locates the problem in the person. And I think we have to fight that kind of neoliberal essentialist blame with everything we have at our disposal. And one of the first things we can do as feminist practitioners, and I know I've had conversations with some of you here already today about this, which you're already doing, is to refuse to hold ourselves in what Canadian sociologists and queer theorist Irving Goffman termed spoiled identities. As he described it, a spoiled identity is any identification that leads to the experience of stigma. In our work, mentally ill, addict, borderline, attention seeking, they're just some examples of spoiled identities. But today I'd like to extend this idea to our understanding of the kind of professional spoiled identities we can ascribe to ourselves and to our colleagues as well as we struggle in this system. Identities like compassion fatigued, enmeshed, hardened, burnt out, vicariously traumatized, or whatever language our particular method uses for people who are struggling to care effectively. instead of describing ourselves and each other in these stigmatizing ways, I want us to consider the relational shared space of feminist organizations like this one as a place to envision solidarity and collective action that actively pushes back against the idea that being impacted by trauma is some kind of personal failing. This is not to say that we don't look at ourselves or hold ourselves accountable for our ways of working with our clients, but what do we do with that accountability? How do we engage with it? I want to ask you to consider, if you haven't already, that feminist therapy practice asks us to find the sweet spot in our work where we're both held and able to hold, where we're challenged but not overworked, and where we actively work to undo the harm caused over many years by the helping professions in the name of so-called mental health, particularly for women and girls. To do this must involve collective ethics and collective care, part of what you're building here, and an understanding of our impact on each other every day in every interaction. And to do this asks that we commit to practice that recognizes that there is no separation between worker and person. And the very idea of this separation is colonialist. It's a patriarchal attempt to create a fracturing, a social fracturing, an internal fracturing, not just between the body and the mind, but also between us and the world. Every trauma our clients and colleagues bring to us is part of our shared ecology. I might not have been present as fire raged through your neighborhood, or floods, actually, as we're going through now. I may not have been a member of the church or the school or the workplace where you were assaulted, but I'm part of the world where these things happened. I may be an unwitting victim or an accomplice in either a small or a larger picture of your suffering, as you may be to mine. As Canadian social worker and poet Kai Cheng Thom has spoken of many times, trauma is not only socially constructed, so are the pathways to recovery. It's not who you are, it's what happened to you. Understanding what happened to you within a feminist framework changes not only how we feel about ourselves and our tender spots or delicacies, as one of my friends refers to those places where we still feel a bit stuffed up. It changes how we see and engage with the world. It means that we explore those intersections of racism, sexism, and colonial power. So our work becomes less focused on changing the whole outside existing overwhelming world and more about world building, continuing to reflect on what we can do in the spaces we create, like this one, to interrogate the structures we work in and the ones we're building. Just like we can come here today in the knowledge that the so-called women's movement is a spontaneous uprising that has roots on every continent, in every class, culture, and for thousands of years prior to its commercialized existence. I think the questions we need to keep asking ourselves as part of this ongoing interrogation, and the answers are going to depend on who we are, where we are, and who we're working with. We're not going to repair the damage of this time and the legacy of our own professions right away. So it's ongoing, and its impacts will be too. But to avoid oversimplification and one size fits all, because when has one size ever fit everyone? We can ask at each point in our work, who can I connect with to increase the level of collective care in my particular profession? How can I continue to build a feminist community of practice? What's required, I think now more than ever in this pandemic time, is feminist solidarity in the face of structures that are so often not serving our work or the work of our colleagues we support, and most importantly, the clients who are meant to be at the very center of what we do. But they're our professions, and we can expose the traumatic foundations of many of our bases of evidence and the structures of practice. It's part of why you've come to this place from other, sometimes terrible places. We can speak and act collectively for what we need to work effectively and for what our clients need. And we can support each other collaboratively to be able to continue to do the important work we do. And we can resist being compartmentalized into worker and person, not so that we're no longer professional, but for exactly the opposite reason. So we can really embrace what we know and understand about what allows all people facing gender-based oppression and its intersections to thrive in community. And finally, I've been thinking a lot about hope, because hope has always bugged me. Or the requirement to be hopeful is so often what I see with women I work with. The idea that you have to keep hoping, that relationships will get better, that jobs will get better, that people will change. And I think I want to say that you don't have to be hopeful or to feel hopeful for change to happen at this time, this kind of celebration of International Women's Day. You don't need to hold on to hope, especially when you look around at where the world is at. Who wouldn't be devastated? Who shouldn't be devastated? Why would you feel hopeful if you want a deep connection to reality? Just like that research that shows us that people who are depressed or have a better connection to reality than the rest of us. Why wouldn't you be devastated? Why shouldn't you be devastated? You don't have to be ashamed of cynicism or despair when they descend upon you, or pathologize your distress when it comes at the state of the world. And you do not have to be inspirational. You don't have to smile. And as academic and activist Chelsea Watego reminds us in her really unbelievably great book, Another Day in the Colony, that was just released, people who are the most vulnerable to oppression have always been required to be hopeful of change and open to dialogue and ongoing connection with oppressive structures and abusive relationships. I want you to give yourself permission to replace hope and inspiration with an ongoing commitment to the practice of solidarity and justice. You can just be here now, like you are in this place, and build a community of practice that you commit to. Just continue to be present to yourselves, the people you work with, and to each other, just like you've been doing here for, I think it's 3 years now. And just like the magpies, you can keep taking the trackers off of each other, even when someone tells you they're there for your own good. Because that's so much better than hope, so much stronger than inspiration. It's action and practice right here and right now, and that's real. And that's how you build new feminist worlds like this one. So thank you for sharing this time with me. Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Zoe. That was amazing. I'm Phoebe Higgins. I'm the Director of Publishing and Research at the Centre. I'm particularly passionate about this arm of the Centre because I think that stories have this incredible ability to impart wisdom, to open hearts and minds, to challenge and to educate. Empathy is, first of all, an act of the imagination, a storyteller's art, a way of traveling from here to there. And it's through sharing our stories sharing our wisdom, that we're able to create real change in the world of mental health, to feel seen, heard, and discover new ways of being. In celebration of International Women's Day, it's a real honour to create space for these brilliant and bright women to share their stories. I'm so happy to be introducing the next speaker, Sasha Elk, who I have asked to read for us today from her short story, She, that we published earlier this year. I'll just preface her reading by mentioning that the story is from the perspective of someone with body dysmorphic disorder. So for anyone watching at home, if you want or you feel uncomfortable or triggered by listening to that, you can just pop your computer on mute for a minute, and then when you see my face back on screen, you can unmute it. Sasha is a writer from the Mornington Peninsula. She's inspired by the struggles of the head and the heart. She loves exploring truths of the human condition through fiction. Outside writing, her passions are film, music, and nature. She recently completed her third major manuscript and is enjoying country life with her husband and 2 small children. Please welcome Sasha.
Thank you, Phoebe, and thank you, Sonia, and all of you wonderful women for having me here tonight. Okay. She must feel good today, tells me I look nice, even smiles at me. It's a strange but welcome change. The sidelong glances of loosely bridled disgust have become more frequent of late. So frequent, they've become the new norm. On an average morning, she'll look as if there's something foul under her nose, if she so much as glimpses me. She looks away quickly, trying not to make eye contact, but sometimes it's unavoidable. She'll grit her teeth. She'll grit her teeth and hold my gaze if she has to, braving the sight of me. I know she holds her tongue in those moments, holds back whatever words are right there, wanting to be spoken but not daring, because she knows they'll wound me, ruin my entire day, maybe even my week. She tries to be kind, occasionally, though the fact that she has to try only makes me sad. But today she smiles. I'm not even wearing makeup. Perhaps it's the new clothes. It's just a simple blue-black t-shirt and a light pilgrim-style cream cardigan, but they sit well, flattering. Even so, I don't want to go. The beach. My version of that dream where you turn up to work naked. I wouldn't feel comfortable walking around in front of a bunch of strangers in my underwear, so why would I feel any different in a bikini? I don't think I'll go in the water today, I say. Shame twists inside me, pulling tight on a knot in my stomach. Okay, my husband says, a gentle smile, a nod of acceptance, whatever makes me comfortable. Forever a pillar of love and support. But I know he wishes I could just enjoy it, for all our sakes. We go, him, our daughter, and her. The sand is cool and hard in the shadow of the cliff. There's a throng of people in a wedge of sun still left on the beach, enjoying the last of today's warmth before it too is swallowed by the evening. Bikini bodies, bronze skin, scant linen dresses, smiles. While my husband wades in the shallows with our little girl, I walk in the shade, too warm in the sun because of my attire. I can feel it. Her good mood from this morning has slipped away, twisted into tension and disapproval. I feel like a coward for not going in the water, for not even bringing my bathers. But I know what she'd do if I went in. She'd spend every second scrutinizing any part of my body that isn't her idea of perfect. The backs of my thighs, mottled and lumpy with cellulite, the pale flesh of my stomach, softly shuddering with every step, striped with shimmering pink stretch marks. My upper arms, heavier now than they've ever been. I never lost the baby weight she thought would drop off me while I was breastfeeding, a bitter disappointment. No, I can't flaunt all those imperfections with her watching. Even fully clothed, I feel watched, judged. I can only imagine the onslaught of insults if I were to put my body on display. No one is looking at anybody else. That's what my husband says. I wonder if he truly believes that or if he's just hoping I will. I seem able to listen only to her constant belittling, the seeds of doubt the seeds of doubt she sows whenever I think I look nice. Do you really think that looks good? Does that really hide all your flaws? No, darling husband, someone is always watching. She is always watching. And because she is, so am I. I look down at myself. The only skin visible aside from my face and neck is that of my hands and feet. This is my greatest shame, hiding myself for the sake of her. And I know it's wrong to let her do this to me. I know I deserve better. Why does it matter so much what I look like? I know the answer. It doesn't. But then it does. She makes it matter. A young mother walks past with her partner and toddler. She's wearing a modest black bikini with wide straps supporting a heavy chest. Her flesh is like dough, milky and smooth, round and soft and rising around the seams of its restraints. I watch her, admiring her beauty, her confidence, her acceptance of herself, exactly how she is. She watches too, assessing, scrutinizing, comparing me to that woman. She's thinking, you couldn't wear that. You're too fat. There's a moment initially where I believe her, but then, no, she's wrong. I'd look the same as that woman, like a mother, slightly overweight perhaps, body changed and softened by pregnancy, but perfectly normal, natural, and womanly. I would love to have enough confidence to wear that, I say, a small stand, taking the opportunity to tell her that her scrutiny is damaging, that perhaps if I was built up instead of torn down, browbeaten with doubt and constant shaming, I might be able to put on some bathers and enjoy the beach with my family. But it doesn't matter what I say. She ignores any sense I make. And so do I in the end, because as long as she thinks that, I don't feel safe. My husband doesn't understand. He sees only beauty when he looks at me, says I'm stunning. I try to believe him. But what I see is something skewed, something that changes from 1 minute to the next, one mirror to the next. In this, one reflection, in that, another. Sometimes his opinion, but more often hers. 1 minute attractive, the next repulsive. She hates me. She sneers at the sight of me, and I spend my days ducking her, busying myself with housework, changing the things I can. While I work, avoiding mirrors, I imagine a world without her in it, a world where I can just be, without her sneering judgment. But I don't have much hope of that happening. My greatest wish is that my daughter escapes her unscathed, that her poison doesn't seep into that tiny, innocent little girl like it seeped into me over the years. I tell my daughter her body is strong and healthy and beautiful, perfect however it is, whatever it does, however it changes. And I believe that because I know it is the absolute truth. But I can't believe it about myself because she is forever in my ear, telling me I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm asymmetrical, out of proportion, untoned, unfit, unattractive, weird looking, and if she's being particularly cruel, deformed. Some days she's so awful I cry. Some days I wonder how she became this way, so cruel and bitter. But I know the answer. She's the girl who overheard her friends say she was ugly. She's the girl who overheard her dad say she was fat. She's the girl whose mother said her body would be beautiful if she toned up a bit, if she lost a bit of weight. She's the girl who stubbed her toe in year 12, said, "Fuck me," and her crush replied with a sneering, "No thanks." She's the woman who was told by a co-worker, "You carry it well," when she was only a size 12. She's the woman who was told the 10 kilos she gained during pregnancy is still hanging on tight. She's the bride who was told, "You're too big here," about her thighs while she was being fitted for her wedding dress. She's the woman who, even now, hears every negative thing anyone has ever said about her body and appearance every single time she looks in the mirror. She is me. It's hot. I feel suffocated by the shroud I keep myself wrapped in. The clothing, the layers of my shame. I take off the cardigan, feel the breeze reach my skin and instantly refresh me. Relief. She goes to say something, voice her fear of people judging me. "Shut up," I tell her. "Just shut up. You're driving me crazy." I scan the beach for my husband and daughter, spot them crouching over rock pools, pointing to the tiny wonderlands that lie beneath the water's surface. Near them, the woman in her black bikini has turned to face the ocean, one hand up to shelter her eyes from the glare, standing tall, gazing out at the horizon. I roll the hems of my leggings up to my knees and step out into the sun.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thank you so much for coming all the way here. I really appreciate it. Now we're going to hear from one of our clinical psychologists, Dr. Megan Dobby, about treating trauma in women and in particular her journey towards using eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR. Dr. Megan Dobby is the principal psychologist for Ambulance Victoria and has spent much of her professional career working in acute public mental health services. She's an expert in working with trauma, both single and complex trauma presentations, and has over 15 years experience. She was a therapy program manager for the Melbourne Clinic, for the Living Well programs and the Eating Disorder program. During her tenure at the Melbourne Clinic, Megan was also involved in the service delivery of a specialised program for first responders suffering from PTSD. She's also been the therapy manager at St John of God Pine Lodge Clinic and currently is consultant to the Vic Police Blue Hub pilot program for Victorian police members around the ease of access to treatment programs for evidence-based interventions. Meg has also been a regular reviewer for the International Journal of Traumatic Stress Studies. Please welcome Meg.
Phoebe, your research is amazing. It sounds so fancy, but I must say hearing that beautiful lived experience story is really what we all should be paying attention to. The evidence base, when we all go out and buy our manuals, treatments that work, we've all bought one because that was the textbook you had to get to make sure that you were looking at everything. What we need to do is listen and pay attention and be present with the person sitting across from us, because they can teach us so much and actually build us to be better therapists and better humans working in a compassionate way with the people that sit across from us in a room. So I'm so grateful to the two speakers that have gone before me. What I'm going to talk to you all about today is actually, you know, when I was asked to speak tonight, it was really around, I was thinking about the sort of theme of bias and stereotypes and discrimination and inclusivity. And with the work I do, it's been quite a journey of me through the world of trauma as a clinician. I've worked in that area for around 22 years. When I started my doctorate, I was insistent that I wanted to work on building and writing a treatment program,
mean, why I didn't just do an evaluation using surveys, I don't know, but no, I had to develop, write, research, and then deliver a treatment program in children and adolescents to treat trauma. But I didn't want to just treat people who were put in a basket of a particular type of trauma. I didn't want to separate the boys from the girls in terms of the trauma treatment. I didn't want to treat them individually. I wanted to do a treatment program that focused at the quality of life that these children were experiencing. What was impacting their quality of life? Did it matter that they had a diagnosis of PTSD? But we all know when we work in these institutions and we do our theses and we go about our business, particularly early on, you need to take people into the study and what are the exclusion criteria and, you know, what are the inclusion criteria and do they fit the mold? And I didn't like that approach. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was just going about my business, being quite persistent about doing what I wanted to do in treatment of children and adolescents with trauma symptomatology. To do that, though, I had to say we were going to provide a treatment that was just going to look at the symptoms that were impacting quality of life. And it's pretty hard to get parents to allow you as a young person in early career to allow all the kids in the room to talk about their traumas. Now, that's where I first sort of uncovered this idea really, that maybe we didn't need to talk about the trauma in order to recover. So I thought about the premise as I knew it in my early career brain, still not really knowing what I didn't know at that point, of the basics, what we're all taught. Psychoeducation, that's a key feature of any treatment, isn't it? Identification of key symptoms impacting quality of life. What is the evidence base for cognitive behavioural therapy? I'm dating myself, but that was all the rage and the thing that everyone had to do in a manual. Don't go off script, it had to be in a manual. So what were the CBT-based treatments for symptoms to improve those aforementioned problems with quality of life? Creating symptom reduction, including, of course, the obligatory homework required. For any good therapist, you have to give people homework to do outside of hours, and recording of the symptoms they were experiencing during the treatment. Amazingly, when I think about that now, the treatment appeared, at least in my research, to be effective, allowing those participating in my program to have better sleep, to have reduced flashback intensity, distancing from their experience of their trauma, which they reported even though I wasn't aware of what those traumas were for those participants, lowered hypervigilance, and resulting in improved mood and lowered reports of anger in these children and adolescents. Gender did not come into this, nor did their trauma type. So as I sort of ended my doctorate and decided to go and work, you know, in a career in psychology out in the world, I was pulled in multiple directions. But I certainly didn't feel like I had the personal or lived experience to work with children and adolescents, even though I'd spent the last 3 years working really hard with children and adolescents because I was a young person. I didn't have children of my own. I hated that question as a therapist when a parent would say to me, "Do you have children?" And I learnt to respond, "It feels like I have many," because that was the best I could come up with without feeling like I was an imposter in their environment. So because I didn't think that I should be working with children, I went to work with adults. And because I didn't think that I wanted to focus on manual-based treatments and following 20 manual-based treatments, I decided to work in acute psychiatry, where I was told by people real psychologists didn't work. So I decided that why I went into psychology was to work to help people in crisis, to really meet them where they're at, sit across from them, look at what was going on with their quality of life and try and make a difference by hearing their stories and being curious about what could help. But I went into the public mental health system and I worked on CAT. I worked in acute inpatient units, eating disorder units, consultation liaison psychiatry. And that's where I worked out that when working with trauma, serious, horrific, protracted, repeated trauma or single incident trauma, you didn't need to hear every aspect of someone's trauma or their experience to help them. Or more importantly, for that individual to recover, they didn't need to repeatedly go through it with you. So flash forward, because I'm still looking for, some way to make myself credible. And I decided to study prolonged exposure therapy. Now, one of the reasons why I did that was because early in my career, when I was doing my thesis and writing that treatment for trauma for children, I'd watched a psychiatrist doing EMDR with an 8-year-old. And all I saw was a psychiatrist waving his hands backwards and forwards and watching this little boy experience intense emotions. And there was no verbalization. All that psychiatrist kept saying was, what do you notice now? And the little boy would be quite distressed and off they'd go again. And I thought it was some strange form of voodoo and I wanted no part of it. So back to the manual. So I went and decided I'd studied prolonged exposure therapy. And this has been a stalwart of my treatment with emergency service workers with PTSD for really the remainder of my career. The short version goes like this. Prolonged exposure is a specific type of cognitive behavioural therapy that teaches individuals to gradually approach trauma-related memories, feelings, and situations. Most people want to avoid anything that reminds them of the trauma they've experienced, but doing so will reinforce their fear. So we're going to make them approach it. It's characterised by 2 main treatment procedures, Imaginal and in vivo exposures. Imaginal exposure is repeated on purpose retelling of the trauma memory. In vivo exposure is gradually confronting situations, places and things that are reminders of the trauma or feel dangerous despite objectively being safe. So not only do I make you sit there in a session and go over and over and over your trauma for 90-minute sessions, because we don't do 60-minute sessions in trauma work, I then make you go home and listen to those sessions, listen to yourself going back over those traumas, and make you go into environments that are going to get you closer and closer to those experiences that previously traumatized you. Why would anyone come back? I'd been influenced by treatments of choice at the time, and suddenly I was there making people relive their traumas. Now, don't get me wrong, it worked, it's evidence-based, but looking back, I realised that not only was it so taxing on my clients, the person sitting across from me in the room who trusted me enough to keep coming back despite this treatment, but I was also starting to question, how long can I do this as a therapist? How long can I sit with this and watch this happen to people across the room from me? I'd started seeing people use EMDR more and more. I'd seen it before in that early training in the major hospital, didn't want a part of it. It was the wacky finger waggling, which I still call it today. Very little speaking, lots of emotional responses. And I really did think it was voodoo. But now I was asked to oversee a program of clinicians as a manager in a major hospital who were going to do EMDR with people in the hospital that I worked at. So I felt that I was completely out of my depth and it was time to learn more. Now I needed to do some training to actually understand. I was lucky enough to be trained by Dr. Graham Taylor, and he really is one of the Australian gurus when it comes to EMDR and one of our expert clinical psychologists in the field. Suddenly I felt a range of things going to that training. The first thing was my bias around this treatment started really early in my developmental years as a psychologist. The second thing was, if I'd paid more attention to this trauma treatment's development over those years, I would have probably come to this much sooner. My biases had stunted my own growth as a therapist in the area, and I'd gone about my work largely unchallenged by the people around me. That reinforced my belief that prolonged exposure treatment was really the only way and the best approach to trauma care. And I was seeing wonderful prolonged exposure supervisors also embedded in the therapy and invested in the therapy and finding it effective with their clients as I was. And third, I really understood that people do not have to talk about their trauma in order to recover. And I'd been there 20 years ago without even realising I'd been there. Now, I can't explain the whole premise behind the treatment of EMDR here tonight, and I'm a practitioner, not a trainer in EMDR. I'm still learning myself, but I can talk about why I'm now choosing EMDR and advocate for this type of treatment when working with people and trauma. This is what happens to PTSD sufferers. The memory for a significant proportion of people suffering does not fade with time. It feels absolutely current and impossible to talk about. During a traumatic event, a person's emotional response can be so extreme that the memory becomes encoded in the fight or flight part of the brain, in the amygdala, instead of the hippocampus. It stays locked in that part of the brain as a survival pattern, ready to reactivate if a similar emergency should arise again. Around 75% of people who experience trauma will eventually reprocess the memory through the hippocampus. They'll finally store it in the neocortex as a past event. They know it was horrendous at the time, but it no longer makes them feel terrified to recall it. Their memory fades and they feel like they have distance from it. For the other 25%, recalling that memory is itself a horrendous experience. They feel they're right back there in that awful time. Talking about it for those people may make things worse because the pattern just gets reactivated. So what does help? An effective trauma relief treatment must be able to generate both sufficient dissociation and sufficient calm in the sufferer to allow the painful memory to be reprocessed safely so that it can be moved, so to speak, from the now focused fight or flight in the amygdala to the neocortex, where it will be tagged as past, no longer threatening to them. EMDR has people recalling an image, a feeling, belief associated with that traumatic event, while following with their eyes side to side with the hand movements of the therapist. Sometimes the process is automated with a moving light. Sometimes we might get people to stand up and step from side to side. Sometimes I make them count backwards from 100 in sevens. It depends. Any way we can actually keep them grounded in the present while also working with this past experience. By keeping part of the client's attention in the present time, by giving them the task of following their eyes with something that's happening now, whilst recalling a traumatic event, not talking about it, but recalling it in their mind, their brain has a chance to log that terrifying memory as past. To help a client overcome trauma, we need to keep them comfortable and relaxed. Present, PTSD drags people back in time, or at least that's the way it feels. And we actually need to keep them disassociated. The client needs to experience being associated with the present or a sense of empowerment and dissociated from the trauma itself. When this happens, even decades-old trauma can be lifted incredibly comfortably and quickly. Any technique that can help clients do these three things will help them. Trying to get clients who are less extremely traumatized talk through what happened may help them process the trauma eventually, but it could be painful. And for around a quarter of clients, talking about the trauma may actually deepen it because it means they have to experience the horror again and again. So I want you to challenge your own biases around treatments that work. Challenge your own needs and biases around needing to know all about the trauma to help someone. Learn new skills and surround yourself by supervisors who challenge you to think about different treatments, are trained differently from you, and seek expert consultation for specific treatment modalities as an adjunct to your practice. For our women and girls, let's ensure that we are respectful of their responses to trauma, respectful of the privacy to hold the knowledge within themselves, and encourage them to seek support without necessarily being dragged through their experiences over and over again. The system, to those that are feeling traumatized, the system around them, those who are vulnerable, is incredibly difficult to deal with. Legal, medical, psychiatric systems that people interface often when they've experienced trauma are punitive, unforgiving, and are already getting the individual to tell their story. This often forces people to re-experience some of the most frightening and distressing moments of their life. And I understand that if people are looking at finding ways to, charge people with the trauma that they have inflicted on someone else, I understand that people need to make statements. But in my office, sitting across from me when they come for support, they're not making a statement. They're asking for help and calm and compassion. So I think it's really important for us as therapists to know how our own experience of being part of that bigger system in which we work can result in you potentially embedding the same practices as some of these other more broader systems that we interface with, and perpetuating these biases as well. I encourage you to explore your own biases, know them well, and then break the bias when working compassionately with others, particularly our women and girls. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Meg. It's so interesting. And for anyone who is interested to learn more about EMDR, Meg and I have been working on a little project which we'll be releasing an introduction to EMDR on our Learn Worlds page in the not too distant future, which is mainly aimed at early career practitioners who may be interested in learning more. So stay tuned for that release. Our last speaker this evening is Vianne Nguyen. Vianne is a registered psychologist with specialist training in organisational psychology and has been practicing for 5 years. Her areas of special interest include working with individuals to address challenges related to cross-cultural experience, generalised anxiety disorder, OCD and social anxiety, as well as issues relating to career transitions, work stress and burnout. Last year, Vianne was promoted to the Director of Professional Programs at our centre, and tonight she is going to speak to us about her own professional journey so far. So please welcome Vianne.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you to all the speakers that have gone so far. I feel so honoured to be part of the lineup. International Women's Day is actually one of my favourite times of the year. I find that it's just designated time to really unapologetically talk about feminist issues that really impact everyone. And my clear preference would be to talk about it all year long, which is probably why I'm at the centre. So in this night of storytelling, as Phoebe mentioned, I'll be sharing my personal career journey, how I came to this centre, and leading into the development of the professional programs branch. So in a past life, in my first career, I was a management consultant. Essentially, I worked in project teams to go into different organisations, conduct research and provide some recommendations about their people and organisational problems. I was really attracted to that type of work for the promise of working in high-performing teams, on stimulating projects that were really impactful. And this was great for my nosy self because I got to pop into all different kinds of organisations, see what their culture was like, and really get an idea of what makes up corporate Australia. So I always had the mindset that if you work hard, the results will speak for itself. And I carried that thinking into the work. I put in my 110%, all of the blood, sweat and tears, probably too often. And so moving into this work, I started to see some really common themes in my feedback from peers and project team members. I got a lot of feedback saying that I wasn't enough. I wasn't confident enough, assertive enough. I wasn't pushing boundaries enough. So I thought, okay, let me have a look around. I'll just look at who is enough or more than enough and what does success look like? So let me be that person. And what I started to see was a pretty clear picture. A model of success is someone that can come in at 7 a.m. And I know I fell into that race of like just wanting to be that first person in the office. You can wear it like a badge of honor. someone who could stay as late as needed, who was available and responsive 24/7, who could push their weekend priorities and just meet the work. And also someone who had that really kind of overt charisma, in a way where you just glance at them and you're like, okay, I trust that person. So in case you couldn't tell from my list, I started to realize there is a type of person that really fits that description and a bunch of people that might struggle to tick all of those boxes. In essence, I saw that a lot of white males typically were able to kind of shape their life around the work, but anyone who had any kind of caregiving responsibilities or family responsibilities would struggle to meet that. And it's not necessarily just working mums, but also people who they could be like working on a visa or international backgrounds who would be supporting their family and have time or need to dedicate time to look after their family's needs. And so I was starting to notice all the different biases around me. And I think one example of a time that I really felt that was when I was working on a project with a peer of mine. So we had the same qualification, same level of experience. We were really good friends. So I would say pretty much the same personality. And it was just like a same age, same income kind of type of comparison. So our overt differences were that he was a white male who was very tall. I think that detail is important. And I'm woman of color on the smaller side. So I had actually joined the project first and he came on board. And it was at that stage that I noticed our differing treatments and just how vastly different it was. All of a sudden, my expectations had shifted and I was kind of expected to take notes in every meeting, that's fine, clean up the room after our meetings and workshops. And I would often be asked questions like, you know, V, what were your 3 takeaways from this meeting? What did you learn today? Which could be a fine question, maybe, but it wasn't the same treatment that my peer was getting. Instead, he was being given all of the leadership responsibilities and was expected to lead all of the engagements. And he had noticed this himself. So he started to ask me, V, do you want to take some of this on? You know, it was obvious to him too. So I was thinking, okay, you know, there is something wrong here. I think there is something wrong with what I'm doing. I started to kind of look at how can I assimilate? I need to try harder to get there. I started talking to a lot of my mentors and coaches, and I asked them, this is my journey, this is my feedback. Do you happen to know what's wrong with me? Why can't I get there? And so then my mentor prompted me, maybe the question is not what's wrong with you, but actually what environment do you thrive in? And I hadn't quite thought about it in that way before. So she prompted me to really think about the broader system that we're in. It made me look around and really see clearly that the system we're in is one clear example of how the patriarchy plays out. It's one that rewards people who have existing privilege, whereas people with different starting points are kind of left to their own devices, not really boosted up the same. And I had thought of myself as someone with a lot of privilege. You know, I kind of go about my day and there are a lot of things that I don't need to manage, whether it's neurodiversity or fighting for trans recognition. So I was really starting to see, okay, there are so many different points that we're beginning from, but when do we reach the same place? And at that stage, I decided to just take a step back, really reflect and think about what are my unique strengths and where will they be valued? It was pretty much in that time that I came across the centre and they took me on board. Very quickly, I started to see that there were some really great environmental fits. I could talk about feminism. I could throw words out like the patriarchy and no one would bat an eye. So I was like, okay, good sign. And so I started working with women on careers counseling, work-related stress, and so many of the same themes kept popping up over and over again. It was a lot of women saying, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just can't get there. I feel so stuck in where I am at work. Or a lot of anxious overachievers who are saying, like, I'm just not where I should be. So combining all of our experience and things that Sonia and Phoebe were hearing from clients, we thought maybe this is a really great opportunity and we're positioned to pass those learnings forward. And our centre's vision is to see a future where women and girls are empowered in all aspects of life. So we launched the professional programs branch as a place to support people to reach their personal and professional goals. And where we are now is that we've looked at all of our experiences, we've looked at feedback, consulted our practitioners on what they see as needs among their clients. And we're really excited to announce the launch of our first program. So our very first offering is called Uncover Your Career Pathway. It's for anyone who's feeling stuck at work or is feeling lost. And it includes 4 toolkits for individual reflection, covering topics from communication styles, limiting beliefs, confidence. And there are also opportunities to connect with others and really have that shared collective learning and share your reflections. So we hope that you kind of stay connected to hear updates about when it's launched and share it with anyone who you think might be feeling a little bit stuck in where they are and who could really benefit from this kind of guidance and the notion that maybe it's not a you problem, but in order to really create lasting change in the system, it starts with reflection on yourself. What are the stories that we tell ourselves and how can we start having this conversation? Thank you so much for listening to me share my story. And just as we wrap up the night, I'll bring it back to Sonia. Thank you.